Welcome to the Pro-Life Apologetics 101 mock dialogue audio. We have compiled several short dialogues that you can listen to in order to hear how conversations may play out and get more comfortable with our conversational tools by hearing them being used. In this audio, we will focus on common ground analogy question, the human rights argument, and discussing the humanity of the preborn. The conversations you hear will often end with another question from the pro-choicer because we're focusing in on specific parts of conversations. Alright, let's start with 3 examples of common ground analogy in question. Pay close attention to how the pro-lifer draws out a circumstance and then finds common ground on it before giving an analogy.
Hi there. What do you think about abortion?
Look, I don't like it, but sometimes it's definitely needed.
Is there a particular circumstance that you think it's needed?
Well, for example, if a woman didn't choose to get pregnant, so if she was raped, then she should definitely be allowed to get an abortion.
I agree with you that rape is an horrific crime, and I really can't even imagine how hard that would be for a woman. And we really need to help the women who are raped. We need to provide whatever help they need, whether it be counseling or physical help, whatever they need. It's so awful.
Absolutely, yeah.
Imagine if a woman was raped. This is so terrible. Imagine if she was raped and she found out she was pregnant. For whatever reason, she decided to keep her child. 9 months later, she gives birth to a beautiful little baby boy. 1 week goes by, 2 weeks go by. Her child begins to look so much like her rapist, and it reminds her of the trauma. Would it be okay because of this? Because her baby reminds her of that day, would it be okay to kill her 2-week-old born child?
Like the born baby?
Yes.
Well, no, of course not.
No, of course not. We would never do that. So why is it okay for us to kill the same child preborn for the same reasons?
Shoot, you kind of got me there. I've never really thought of it that way before. Alright, notice that in that last example, the pro-lifer really emphasized common ground. Of course, this is always very important to do, especially when the circumstance brought forward is one of sexual assault. Now then, in the next example, notice how the same pattern is applied to a completely different difficult circumstance.
Hey there, what do you think about abortion?
Well, I think we need it, what if the mother's too poor?
I agree with you that to be poor and pregnant would be really tough. I can't even imagine how hard that would be. Now imagine with me that this woman was financially stable at first, but 2 weeks after giving birth, her husband lost his job and they quickly fell into poverty themselves. Now they can barely afford to keep themselves fed and clothed and everything, much less the child. So would it be okay for them to have their 2-week-old born baby killed because they are now too poor to raise it?
No, not once the child is born.
Right. So if it's not okay to kill a 2-week-old born child because of poverty, why is it okay to kill that same child for the same reason only 3 weeks earlier?
Well, that's different. They're not human yet.
So what if you're thinking, okay, what if I can't find any common ground with the pro-choicer? Well, in this next example, the pro-choicer is going to say, look, if it's a woman's body, it's a woman's choice. Now, pay close attention to how the pro-lifer in this example finds common ground, makes an analogy, and presents a question, once again bringing it back to the humanity of the preborn. Hi, what do you think about abortion?
Oh, I'm for it 100%.
Why is that?
Well, it's a woman's body, so it's a woman's choice.
Okay, well, I agree with you that choices are really important. That said, suppose there were a mom walking by with her 2-year-old toddler right here, and she chose to start beating her child to death right in front of us. Would you do something about it?
Yeah, I really would like to think I would.
Of course, yeah. I'm sure we would all drop what we're doing and try to protect that child. So, if we agree that even without knowing anything about the situation, it's not okay for a woman to choose to beat her 2-year-old child to death, why is it okay to choose to have the same child killed when they're younger?
Well, it's totally different because when they're still inside the mom, they're not human.
So that shows us common ground, analogy, and question. Just a reminder, always start with common ground. And as you saw in those examples, if somebody just says, well, I'm pro-choice, you can always draw them out by saying, well, why is that? Often, this will get them to give you a difficult circumstance that you can find common ground with. All right, let's move on now to the human rights argument. There are 3 really good examples coming up showing you different ways to use the human rights argument. The first one we're going to look at is somebody who says, you know what, I haven't thought about abortion.
Hey, what do you think about abortion?
I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about it much.
Okay. Can I ask you, do you believe in human rights?
Yeah, of course.
And for all humans?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Me too. So, if something is growing, doesn't that tell us it's alive?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And if 2 humans reproduce, what species is their offspring?
Well, human, obviously.
Right. So, if abortion directly and intentionally kills a living human being, doesn't it logically follow that abortion is a human rights violation?
Oh, I've never thought about it that way before. You've given me something to think about.
So that was the basic human rights argument. Now, another fairly common situation in which the human rights argument is very useful is when a man says, you know what, because I'm a man, I don't think I should have an opinion on abortion. Notice in this next example how the pro-lifer takes a man through the human rights argument, and even though he's being a little bit difficult a few of the times, she still managed to get through it and explain at the end, through the use of an analogy, why, regardless of who he is, he should still speak out against the injustice that is abortion.
Hey, what do you think about abortion?
Nothing really. As a man, I don't think abortion's any of my business.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. Can I ask you though, do you believe in human rights?
Of course.
Yeah, and for all humans?
Yeah, for everyone, yeah.
Great. So, if something's growing, doesn't that tell us that it's alive?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if 2 humans reproduce, what species will their offspring be?
Well, that would be a human. But I see where you're going with this, and I still don't agree that I, as a man, should tell women what to do with their bodies.
Whoa, hold on there. So, if we know that abortion directly and intentionally ends the life of a living human being, living because it's growing and human because its parents are human, doesn't it follow that abortion would be a human rights violation?
Well, I mean, like, when you put it that way, it makes sense. But I'll be honest, you're a girl, so it's okay for you to believe what you do with your body. I'm a guy. I'm just gonna stay out of that.
Well, the reason I pointed to abortion as a human rights violation is because it's the identity of the victim that counts, not our own identity. For example, if we lived during the time of the slave trade, even though you're not black, like the victims, you could still stand up and defend their rights, right?
I mean, okay, that does make sense. I can sort of see the parallel maybe, but I'm not sure that the preborn are actually persons, so I don't know.
Sometimes the pro-choicer doesn't want to let us ask the questions, or they want to know what we believe. The following dialogue demonstrates how you can use the human rights argument as a statement of your own beliefs.
Hi there. What do you think about abortion?
I want to know what you think first.
Okay, no problem. I believe in human rights for all human beings. Actually, I think you and I can both agree on that.
Fair.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
So, since you and I believe in human rights for all human beings, and when we think about it, two human beings, what species do they always make?
Human beings.
Yeah, obviously. As humans, we always make other human beings. Now, for a second, I have another question. If something's growing, what does it tell us about that thing? They've got to be alive, right?
Yes.
I would agree. Now, if someone's pregnant, you and I would agree that they would be pregnant with a human being that's got to be alive because they're growing. And then we also agree that all human beings should have human rights. Just thinking about it that way, wouldn't that make abortion a human rights violation?
That makes sense. But they're not even conscious yet.
All right, now that we've covered the human rights argument and a couple of different examples in which to use it, let's move on to discussing the humanity of the preborn. These following examples will start partway through the conversation. Our first dialogue shows how we can use the sled principle and an analogy to a born child to show that level of dependency doesn't actually determine the humanity of the preborn. Pay close attention to how the pro-lifer in this dialogue challenges the pro-choicer by calling them out on something they've already agreed to earlier on in the conversation.
If it's not okay to choose to kill a born child, why is it okay to choose to kill the same child when they're younger?
Well, but that's totally different. I mean, come on, a fetus isn't even viable yet.
I agree with you that a preborn child can't live on their own, that they're far more dependent on their mom than a born child. That said, I have a 3-year-old niece, and she is far more dependent on her parents than I am on mine. Does that make her less human than I am?
Well, no.
Right, I agree. Because how dependent someone is doesn't tell us what someone is. And so, if how dependent my 3-year-old niece is doesn't make her less human, then why would it make the preborn less human?
I mean, yeah, that's something to think about, but look, it should still be a woman's choice.
It seems strange that you would think that since we've already agreed that a woman shouldn't be able to make that choice for a born child, and it seems we agree that how dependent the child is doesn't change what she is, a human. And so, if you agree with human rights for all humans, why don't we agree on human rights for younger, more dependent humans?
Oh, shoot, I don't know, I guess you got me there. Look, I'm not sure why, but I just can't stomach the idea of forcing someone to be pregnant. Now, in this next example, watch how the same type of method is used. Basically, at first, the pro-choicer says, well, it's just a fetus. So the pro-lifer responds with, what type of fetus? And then applies that same analogy between themselves and a younger born child to point out that the size doesn't tell us what something is, and that, in fact, we've already agreed that that's a human.
But it's not even human yet. It's just a fetus.
Well, what species of fetus is it?
What do you mean?
Well, okay, I'm not sure if you know about this, but, like dogs, for example, when the dog is still inside of the womb, it's actually a dog fetus. So other species have fetuses too. Dog fetuses, dolphin fetuses. What species of fetus do humans have?
Human, I guess.
Yeah.
But you're going to tell me that that clump of cells counts, like, as a human being like we are?
Well, you know what, I mean, I agree with you that obviously a preborn child, when they're a fetus, is just a tiny clump of cells at a very early stage. And yet, it makes me think, I have this 3-year-old niece, and she is much smaller than I am, right? I eat way too much. That said, though, does the fact that she's much tinier than I am mean that she is less human than I am?
No.
Well, of course not, right. So, can we agree then that, how big or small or the size of a thing doesn't tell us what that thing is?
Yeah, I guess so.
Right, okay, so if that's true, then am I right in hearing you that you're telling me it's not okay to kill something when they're larger, but it is okay to kill a slightly smaller human being?
Oh, I guess I get where you're coming from. No, that doesn't make sense.
In our final example, you'll hear another sled analogy followed by what we call the human plus argument. This becomes a useful way to point out that using personhood as the criteria for human rights is merely a way to take rights away from some humans. Also notice that the pro-choicer has to get going, and this is the final little piece that the pro-lifer wants to leave them with. This human plus argument can be a really great way to end a conversation.
Well, I guess you're right about that. You got me there. It is a human, but it's not a person yet.
Okay, cool. Can I ask you, what do you mean by person? Can you define that for me?
Well, it's not sentient, doesn't have self-identity or conscience, doesn't even have brainwaves yet.
Yeah, for sure. So, can I share with you just a story? It's actually not a story. It's from one of my colleagues. So he has a 6-month-old daughter, and she is not nearly as developed as her father. How she thinks and how sentient she is, it's so much less than her father.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. And so does that make her any less person than her father?
Well, I see where you're coming from, but I'm just not willing to enforce that on anyone. Oh, it looks like my lunch break is almost over. I've got to go soon.
Okay, cool. Can I just leave you with one thought?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Thanks. So if we look at past history, and particularly when grave human atrocities occur, we see that in order to get human rights, or in order to be considered a person, you have to be human plus something.
Mm-hmm.
Are you following me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So human plus male, or human plus white, or human plus anything else you want to insert there.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we doing that to preborn children? In that they have to be human plus a certain age in order to be considered a person and to get human rights.
Oh, I guess so. You've given me a lot to think about. Well, thanks for the conversation. I should go.
Yeah, thanks so much.
That brings us to the end of our mock dialogue audio. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you feel more comfortable with some of our Apologetics 101 tools. I encourage you to listen to this audio as many times as you need to in order to become the best pro-life activist and help make abortion unthinkable.